All right, Sovereign Wealth Fund. That's the subject of our conversation right now. And we've told you that the setting up of such fund is in vogue around the world. There's so many of them. Of course, the first being the Kuwait Investment Authority that was formed way back in 1953. That's before the independence of Kuwait. And we're also saying Nigeria joined in the race around 2010 when the National Assembly passed the bill setting up the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. In this background report, Anne Jibono tells us about this development.
A sovereign wealth fund aims to protect and stabilize the country's budget and economy from excess volatility in revenue and exports. It also assists monetary authorities dissipate unwanted liquidity while funding social and economic development. Sovereign investment vehicles include public pension funds, state-owned enterprises, and sovereign wealth enterprises. As of March 2015, sovereign wealth funds around the world had amassed $7.1 trillion in assets under management, according to the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute, up from $3.4 trillion at the start of 2008. The funds invest in a range of financial assets, from stocks and bonds to real estate and precious metals, but all have an objective to maximize the long-term return from their investments. Of total assets around the world, $4.29 trillion came from oil and gas sovereign wealth funds, which are funded by revenues from energy exports. The most prominent examples of these are in oil-rich countries like Norway, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. The Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority is a Nigerian establishment which manages the Nigeria Sovereign Wealth Fund, into which the surplus income produced from Nigeria's excess oil revenues are meant to be deposited. The Wealth Fund commenced operations in October 2012 and was set up by the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority Act, which was signed in May 2011. It is intended to invest the savings gained on the difference between the budgeted and actual market prices of oil to earn returns that would benefit future generations of Nigerians. The fund was allocated an initial $1 billion and today still stands at that amount. The governors of Nigeria's 36 states have launched a legal challenge on the unconstitutionality of the fund.
The governors were also of the opinion that, look, this is our corporate fund, this is our wealth, and therefore give us what belongs to us. Let us go and save what we want to save. Look at FIRS, for instance. Increase, targets, and then their capacity to, mobilize taxes. Maybe you say 6%, 7% of whatever comes from customs should go into that savings. The National Assembly must ensure that it's going to be moribund, a process for anybody to access funds from there.
You can save it in dollars. Dollar is the most international currency, but we cannot tie all that because sometimes you see dollar will promote. That dollar is very strong. I would not advise we put it in the Chinese yuan.
No investment of the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund is to be made directly or indirectly in the Bahamas.
And Jibono, thank you very much there for that background. Well, joining us in the studio now to discuss the idea of the Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Nigerian economy, we have a number of guests. First, let's welcome the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, Mr. Uche Orji. Mr. Orji, welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you so much.
All right, and then we also have with us here at the studio seated beside Mr. Orji, the Country Director of the African Development Bank, Mr. Usmane Dore. Mr. Dore, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, clear.
All right, Kingsley, we also have with us here in the studio to discuss this a very important topic, Sovereign Wealth Fund, a researcher on Sovereign Wealth Fund, a doctorate student with focus on investment strategies of the Sovereign Wealth Funds, Shafi'il Ndenusa. I think I got that correct?
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And from Lagos, that's Lagos Network Center, will be joined by a development expert and economist, Dr. Bolaji Ogunseyi. Dr. Bolaji Ogunseyi, it's not a new face on our program. Thank you for taking the time to go through the traffic in Lagos to get to our station on Victoria Island. Dr. Ogunseyi, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
All right, Claire, let's of course begin with the CEO of the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. The fund has been running for a few years now. A couple of weeks ago, or a few weeks ago as well, some controversy broke as to the actual financial standing of the Sovereign Wealth Fund. We know, of course, that there is some litigation. We're not quite sure of the status of the litigation, whether it's been resolved by the Supreme Court. Some state governments had gone to court. So we're not just dealing with the substance of the matter if it remains sub judice. We were just trying to examine the idea of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, how valuable it is for those, of course, who run it. And in this case, it is for the federal government. At the time that you have been in charge of the Sovereign Wealth Fund, what has been your experience and what have been the challenges?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to give you some real status reports. The experience has been very interesting. I think we started at the end of 2012. The board was inaugurated at the end of 2012. It took a while before we actually received the funding for investing, which was until the third quarter of 2013. So the actual investing activity started in 2013. And we published our 2013 annual reports, which showed we made a profit at the time of 525 million naira, which was just because we hadn't really done much for the year. 2014 was our first full year of investing. We delivered annual net comprehensive income of 15.8 billion naira. So that was a significant step up because we had to invest the assets. And more than any other agency of government, we produce quarterly audited accounts. Our auditors are PricewaterhouseCoopers, and so we publish them every quarter. And so I think the controversy you referred to was either mischief or misinformation. The reality is, if you actually grab your report, you'll see where all the assets are. They're custodied with JP Morgan, which is also the custodian of the central bank. So all of these things are all part of our ability to be both accountable and transparent. So the annual reports are there. We publish our annual report, like I said, within the first 90 days of the end of the year, and the quarterly accounts are there. It's been a very fascinating experience for three reasons. The first was the sheer difficulty of getting a business of that nature started. People have no idea that it took us over 9 months before the actual funds were here, but we had to build a business. We had to hire people. We had to get started. Now we've built a business I think is fairly respected. 21 people work in the Sovereign Wealth Fund. It's been ranked first quartile in terms of global transparency and accountability by the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute. The returns, in my opinion, in a very challenging environment are decent compared to other sovereign wealth funds. I was a speaker at the annual forum of the Sovereign Wealth Fund meeting last September in Milan, and Nigeria was being used as a showcase for how countries can combine development activities locally as well as investing internationally, which is really the showcase of Nigeria's Sovereign Investment Authority. Let me stop and go back a bit to explain how it is structured. When the law was passed in 2011, the law said that the Sovereign Wealth Fund needs to invest in three areas. The first is a fund called a stabilization fund. The essence of the stabilization fund is to provide budgetary support in times of economic stress. And that fund at the moment has 20% of our assets. The second fund is a Nigeria Infrastructure Fund, which invests in domestic infrastructure activities within Nigeria. And there we focused on 5 sectors: agriculture, healthcare, housing, power, and what we call motorways, which includes things like Second Niger Bridge, Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. So these are the focus areas we wanted to start with. And that fund contains 40% of our assets. The final fund is the Future Generations Fund, which is supposed to invest to provide a savings base for the future generation of Nigerians. And that also contains 40% of our assets. And there we invest in things as exoteric as corporate bonds, treasury bills, as well as private equity, public equities, and what we describe as other diversifiers like real estate and things like that, that creates a certain level of returns over time. So at the moment, I think we're very happy with the status. The fund is not only intact, it's actually grown because of the profit we have generated. People look at the cash and say your cash is low. We're not supposed to be keeping cash, we're supposed to be investing. So I think it's been a really wonderful experience, and I'm glad that we're being used now globally as a showcase for how sovereign wealth funds should be structured in Africa.
Okay, Mr. Orji, some people, and luckily enough, we're going to have one of those people who have written, extensively on this matter on our program, and the second set of people that will come in, have described the whole Nigeria's experience of the sovereign wealth fund as a rhetoric. And that's, of course, when you compare it with what obtained in other sovereign wealth funds across the world.
Sure.
Norway, we understand, has over 800 and something billion dollars in its sovereign wealth fund.
Sure.
And Kuwait has the same, I'm sure you're aware of. So where are we comparatively? What do you think it's been a good experience for us? Is there a need for the sovereign wealth fund? That's one. And what is the place of the ECA?
Sure.
Right now?
Okay. Now, the ECA versus sovereign wealth fund is not something I'm going to discuss because it is a federal government discussion between the federal government and the National Economic Council. But let me take you.
But let's know. Are we still running the ECA?
Yes, they're running in side by side. Yes.
The ECA stands for Excess Crude Account.
That is correct.
Yes.
The ECA stays, the sovereign wealth fund stays. When we started, the idea was eventually the two will merge. But obviously, that is not a discussion I'm part of. My job is to manage what's given me to manage and keep it safe and in return.
Who funds the sovereign wealth fund, and therefore who owns it? Federal, state, or
Federation. Federation. It's owned by federal, state, and local government together.
Okay.
Because everything that is sold from oil revenue goes into the federation account. Now, when you have a revenue above your budget, because you clearly can't spend beyond what is in your budget, that had been put into the ECA. The sovereign wealth fund was funded out of the ECA. And at the time when we started, the idea was it to merge. But again, like I said, that matter is sub judice and we can't discuss it. Now, let me take you up on Norway, because that is an experience I know very well. And the reason is because one of my early careers was an asset manager at Goldman Sachs Asset Management in London. And the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund was our client. Do you know how much they started with? Less than $300 million in 1990. And gradually over time, through consistent contribution, they grew it to become the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world. In the 2010-2014 period, the Financial Times reported that they were saving $1 billion a week. I can tell you this, and I used to be an analyst. Not many sovereign wealth funds. I actually counted 6 that started with more than $1 billion in the world. Abu Dhabi, 1976. Do you know how much it started with? We don't know, but most people told me less than $50 million. Today,
So what's your conclusion?
my conclusion is not how you start, it's the consistency with which you contribute.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And the clarification that you've also made as to who owns it, then of course the ECA matter, which we're not touching in the meantime. But before we come to the country director of the African Development Bank, that's Usman Edore, maybe we should go over now to Shafi Undanusa. Of course, you're a doctoral student, so you've buried your head in the various journals and books and so on and so forth. So let's put it this way: you have the latest intelligence.
He wrote the rhetorics of the
sovereign wealth fund.
Sovereign wealth fund.
So let's put it this way: we should assume that you have the latest intelligence on sovereign wealth funds around the world. What's your overview first of sovereign wealth funds around the world before we come specifically to Nigeria, and what lessons can we learn?
Okay, first of all, sovereign wealth funds have been growing in the last 10 to 15 years rapidly in terms of numbers. As at September 2015, if you look at the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute website, in the ranking of sovereign wealth funds, you will notice that there are at least 78 sovereign wealth funds, and in the last 15 years, more than 50 came on board, which means there is an increasing recognition of the importance of sovereign wealth fund by different nations, many nations of the world. Now, what is interesting is that if you look at the total assets under management, according to the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute as of September 2015, you're talking about a region of, for sovereign wealth funds, of $7.2 trillion. Now, Nigeria just has a paltry $1.4 billion, and that represents less than 0.02% of the entire global pool. Now, This is where the issue of rhetoric comes in, because
I'm wondering why you thought so.
Yes, because the consistency in funding the fund has not been there post takeoff. Because when the fund, the board was inaugurated sometime in October 2012, it was expected. In fact, the moment the bill was signed into law, it was expected that the consistency in revenue inflows, in capital inflows, contributions from the federation will be sustained, but that has not been the case. And interestingly, from the performance of the NSIA in the last 2 to 3 years, you will notice a remarkable achievement that has not been recorded in amongst developing nations. It's SWFs that have been established by first of all, the NSIA has been able not only to preserve and maintain the seed capital it was given, it has grown it within a relatively short period of time. Interestingly, and this is why on one side there is the issue of rhetoric in terms of inability to consistently fund this, to provide resources that will expand the capacity of these funds to impact more on the Nigerian economy. And on the other side, there is the reality of our contribution, a relatively insignificant contribution to the global pool of funds that are under, the management of sovereign wealth funds globally. So you have a paradox of a situation whereby we are doing very well, but at the same time, we are not having the opportunity and the resources to be able to expand the scope of our interventions through the NSIA.
I'm wondering, Mr. Danusa, are we being impatient if we were to follow on the track of the rhetoric and the paradox that you've talked about? Look, the Sovereign Wealth Fund has been in existence to this is October 2015, barely 3 years. And if we're to make a comparison, Mr. Orji has told us no